Today we're going to make a rosette. Specifically, we're going to make this cool end grain elm radial rosette with maple purfling. I'm Jeff, and you're watching Home Built Workshop. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to this episode of Home Built Workshop. Today is episode number 2 of Acoustic Guitar Build number 2. That's a lot of 2s. In the first episode, we got the plates joined, thicknessed, and really just kicked off the build. But now we're ready to really start working on these plates. This is a piece of book-matched Port Orford cedar. And what we're going to do today is make the rosette and hopefully get it installed in this top. I've been weighing different options as far as the rosette. Of course, you know you can use about any species of wood in about any configuration, and really the sky's the limit. And that's what's kind of cool about this process. But one thing that it does for me, since there's so many options, it gives me a headache. There's just so many options, and I keep going back and forth as to what I want to use. But I think I've settled on a design that I want to try out. As I was looking around the shop at what I had on hand, trying to find just the right piece, I came across a couple pieces of this elm. Looking at the end grain, the lines are really kind of cool. So I'm wondering if we can't slice this into pieces and make a segmented radial rosette using the end grain of this elm. Since it's a little darker, we surround it with some maple purfling. I think something like that would look kind of cool. Let's try it out.
Apparently, my bandsaw had other plans for the day and didn't want to make these cuts.
Well, that stinks. My blade broke, and I don't have a spare. Always at the worst time. I usually try to keep one on hand, but apparently I've used the last one, and this was it. I guess that means I have to go to the store. Oh boy, I don't have time for this. All right, attempt number 2. New blade installed, and it reminded me of something. I think it was in the rosette episode of the first acoustic guitar build. I had to run to the store in the middle of the episode for something as well. Kind of funny. Go back and watch it if you haven't seen it. I'm gonna cut these pieces down.
I'm cutting off slices of this end grain, kind of like you'd slice cheese. I need about a dozen of these pieces, but I'm gonna cut a few extras just in case.
Here's a little closer look at the little slices I'm going to be using. You can see how those grain lines, I think, are going to look kind of cool if we cut that so they all taper toward the center of the sound hole. Now, since these pieces need to be cut into a taper in order to be able to glue them up into a ring, we need some sort of a jig to hold them in the right place so that we can make our cuts. This is an experimental jig that I've been playing around with. It's kind of based on the Radial Rosette maker, which is Eric Schaefer's jig that he makes and sells over on his website. Link down in the description if you want to check that out. It really just has an angled block which will act as a saw guide so that I can clamp the piece in there, make the cuts at the right angle, and then a little clamping block here that I can use to hold everything in place while we glue it up. To use this contraption, I've just got a sacrificial block here. This will just allow the piece to be up off the board and just help me cut through it a little better. I'm going to take my slice of wood and line up kind of the center grain line down through this little sight hole that I have here. Clamp this guy down.
Then with my saw up against the guide, I can make my cuts on both sides of the piece.
So there's one tapered piece.
I'll just line it up on the jig and use the clamping disc to hold it down.
I guess I'll keep cutting more pieces until I have enough to complete the full circle. The last piece.
Now here's the tedious part. I'm going back around and taking all of those segments and cleaning up all of the edges using a sanding beam. Sometimes the saw cut edge is not perfectly smooth, so I need to clean that up so all the joints are as seamless as possible.
With all these pieces roughly fit, so I'm going to start gluing this together. Now the easy way would be to just go ahead and slather on a bunch of CA glue, and if this was an end grain, that's exactly what I would do. I did make up a sample piece using some of the offcuts, and I tried out the CA glue, but as you can see, the end grain soaks up the CA glue a little bit different in spots. So even though I have run this piece through the drum sander, I can still see some areas of the super glue, and I don't want that on my final rosette. Now I suppose an option would be to just cover the entire thing with CA glue, but I don't want to take the chance of different areas soaking up different amounts of glue. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but I think to avoid that, I'm going to use wood glue. One by one, I'm going to take each joint, get it lined up perfectly, then apply some blue painter's tape to hold it together. Then I can remove the pieces and use the painter's tape as a hinge to apply the tiniest bit of wood glue. Then I'll set it back in the jig, which will hold everything nice and flat, and let the glue dry. This is going to take a little bit of time, but I think it's the best option to avoid the CA glue staining the end grain. Well, after a bit of messing around and what seems like hours, fine-tuning pieces, getting everything glued into place, this rosette is now hopefully solid. With the rosette all glued up, it is time to cut that out. Now on the last acoustic guitar build, I used a circle cutting jig in a rotary tool that revolves around a 3/16 pin, and I have designed this jig to work around a 3/16 pin. My intent was to use the exact same pin, the exact same circle cutting jig to cut it out. But I think I want to try something different. I've been playing around with the CNC machine. This is just a test piece. It uses the same 3/16 pin. My jig has a 3/16 hole. I've got a 3/16 hole in a specific location on the CNC machine. So in theory, I should be able to drop this jig onto the CNC and cut this out. Will it explode? I don't really know. I may have to make another rosette, but let's do it. This is the same pin that I have on my circle cutting jig, except now I've got it stuck into the waste board on my CNC. I have the location of this pin set in the machine so that it'll always go to this location and I can cut out the rosette.
My CNC uses a probe to set the Z-axis, and here I'm setting the Z off of the top of the rosette.
All right, no fear. We didn't buy this machine to have it sitting around. Let's make some parts.
I decided to leave the blue tape on the rosette just to kind of help hold things in place. Turns out the tape was kind of placed the wrong way and the bit kept trying to peel it up. It didn't really cause any problems though, so I guess it was okay. Overall, cutting this out took just over 4 minutes. I wasn't completely sure how fast I could run the machine and not break the rosette, so I was a little cautious on my speeds.
Well, it turns out that I probably didn't need that tape on there. Didn't really stay all that great anyway, but hey, you don't know till you try, right? There's our rosette. We got a little bit of cleanup on the back. Now, I didn't apply any adhesive to the backs of this, but it was stuck enough to hold everything in place to the paper, just I guess based on glue squeeze out when I glued these together. All the joints look good. I think this is going to work great. Should be at a 1/2 inch. Yeah, we're good. Here's a quick tip for you. If you're using calipers to measure something and you're in an especially dusty environment, like a wood shop, I always check the 0 on my calipers before I go to use them. Once in a while, when you look down at them, the needle doesn't quite go to 0. Now, instead of adjusting the dial because you think something got messed up, before you do that, I always grab the end of my shirt and lightly close the jaws just to give it a little wipe to get that dust out of there. And almost all the time, when I close it back up, it goes perfectly to 0. Sometimes you get little dust and particles down in there, and that little tip saves me from readjusting all the time and really ultimately getting incorrect measurements. I learned that little tip from a machinist that I used to work with. I still do it all the time.
To lay out where the rosette needs to go, first I need to remark my center line since the glue joint's kind of hard to see. Then using my mold, I'll trace out the outline of the guitar. That gives us a hard line that we can measure off of to get the center of the rosette. From there, I'll drill another 3/16 hole right where the center of the rosette's going to be. Now I'm going to measure out in all 4 directions and mark the width of my rosette, and that's going to locate exactly where the rosette needs to go.
So there's where our rosette's going to go. Now all we got to do is cut out a recess to fit the rosette in. Now I could use the CNC machine for this. In fact, I have the G-code all ready to go. It just uses this same centering pin. I drop it in place on the wasteboard of the machine and it locates it exactly, makes its cut, and I've even tested it in some scrap. But I'm just a teensy bit hesitant because I don't want anything to happen to this. I think I'm going to do this with the rotary tool and a circle cutting jig and do this kind of the old school way? Can we call a power tool the old school way? Let me know your thoughts on that down below. Anyway, I'm going to use this to cut out the recess. We're just going to set the bit to cut inside the pencil marks that we measured out and then slowly work our way in and then work our way out until we have room for the rosette.
I'm beginning by making just one pass. I need to make sure that the depth is set correctly before I widen the slot.
Now I'll just use my calipers and measure the depth of that slot. And we're between 1/2 and 2/3 of the thickness of the top. So I'm going to stop there. Now we just need to make it wider.
And now it's time for a test fit.
Oh, that's going to be cool. Now before I apply any glue, I'm going to go ahead and trim these purflings. Now I'm going to use regular wood glue for this, so I don't want to take any extra time trying to fit things once I have glue in there.
I'm using a small brush to apply the glue to the slot. I don't want to have a ton of squeeze out, but I need to have enough on there that it bonds well to the wood. I'm also applying some to the inside and outside of the rosette. That way the purfling gets glued in as well. This step was a little bit challenging and a slight bit stressful as well. The fit was already snug before I applied the glue, and of course once you apply the glue, it seems like the wood swells just a little bit, so it got even snugger. Is that even a word? On top of struggling with the snug fit, I had to work quickly because I didn't have a lot of open time since I'm using regular wood glue. I really only have a window of a few minutes before the glue starts to set. Once I felt I got everything seated, then I used this little shelf above my workbench as kind of a makeshift go-bar deck to hold everything in place while that glue set up.
Stressful. Always stressful. We'll let that dry for a little bit, then send it through the drum sander a few times, level it out, and see how it looks.
Now in this clip, I'm only sending it through one time, but I did send this through the drum sander several times until the rosette was level with the top. Now all I need to do is cut out the sound hole. Again, I'm using my circle cutting jig for this. I just need to readjust it so that it's the correct diameter, and we'll cut out the center.
There it is. Well, that does it for this episode. We have a rosette installed. I think that looks really cool. I like the darker color of the elm with the pop of lighter color from the maple purfling. I think this is going to be awesome. Why is every step of building a guitar, I said it on the last series of videos, every step is terrifying. Feels like at any moment, the whole thing can be destroyed. For those of you that have built many acoustics, is it still like that for you, where every moment is a potential disaster? Anyway, I am super happy with this, and we're ready to move on. In the next episode, I'm going to be installing the bracing on the back, and hopefully we'll get to bracing the top as well. We'll see how far we get. Stick around for episode number 3. This wraps up episode number 2 of Acoustic Guitar Build number 2. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you all next time.